The first thing they taught us at the Galactic Academy wasn't orbital mechanics, or conflict de-escalation, or the proper etiquette when addressing a Visteri conductor. It was a single sentence, stamped across our orientation tablets in 312 languages. Humans are weak. Not hateful, not cruel, just weak. The line came with charts, footnotes, and a tone of bureaucratic certainty that made disagreement feel like a clerical error. They'd curated holoclips of broken helmets, crushed pressure suits, and frozen bodies drifting like pale seeds in the black. The clips were annotated with actuarial confidence. Average lifespan 82 cycles. Skeletal density substandard. Dermal integrity poor. Hormonal volatility high. There was even a simulation where you could toggle environmental hazards and watch a human avatar collapse with morbid efficiency. Heat, cold, vacuum, radiation, tick, tick, tick. Down it went. I was not inclined to argue. My species learns early to respect data. My brood mother used to say numbers are the only bones that never decay. Besides, one possessed the visual system to see fragility plainly. The human epidermis was a translucent curtain to my compound eyes. Their capillaries glowed like pink vines beneath tissue you could damage with a misplaced word. Their hearts thudded a timid drumbeat, too loud, to near the surface. They were admitted anyway. A handful each century. Diplomacy, sentiment, the council's taste for theater. I reserved judgment. The academy had taught me to reserve many things: breath during low oxygen drills, fear during hull breach alarms, rage during Aglorian sparring bouts. Judgment is just another breath held behind the teeth. We had 36 species in cohort 3007A. The Visteri sat together in a corrugated bundle, their choir minds sharing one set of eyes and too many opinions. Aglorians dominated the training pits, gleaming plasma claws folded politely against their chests like hidden suns. The Trelsian delegation rolled in on grav rigs, their silicon lattices chimming softly with each computed step. I was one of 6 Kthari, slender and jointed, iridescent plates catching the light. We could fold our rib cages to squeeze through gaps the others couldn't even see. The instructors praised our adaptability, our knack for impossible angles. Humanity had one cadet this century, Kieran Holt male, early 20s if I translated his peculiar count system correctly. Hair the color of oxidized copper and a posture that wavered between coiled and careless. He arrived 2 weeks late. By then we'd already learned the academy's rhythms, the way the grav corridors thinned toward the hub until your stomach tried to climb into your mouth. The faint ozone tang that meant the simulators were still hot from a previous class. The itch of the discipline band that formed around your wrist when you were caught cutting corners on an assignment. We'd learned the dangerous comfort of watching ships depart from the observation deck and feeling as if we were already a part of something larger than ourselves. And we had learned to recite, without irony, that humans were weak. The orientation officers didn't say it with malice. They said it as one says hydrogen burns, or do not invert the containment field. Humility is a survival trait in orbit. The Academy carved humility into every species in attendance. Even the Aglorians had to line up for cafeteria rations like everyone else. Their armor stacked quietly in the decontamination lockers, their enormous hands wrapped around tiny utensils that looked like toys. Kieran missed all of that. He missed Captain Ardo's speech about unity, the midnight tour of the grave gardens, the whispered wagers over who would wash out first. He missed the first hull walk. He missed the moment our cohort gelled into something like a family. On the day he finally arrived, he didn't stride into the main hall with a banner or a trumpet. He drifted in behind a freight crate, a small figure pushing a big box, as if he'd volunteered to help the docking crew and forgotten to stop. Human, I murmured, reflexively, to my friend Shrook. The Aglorian S-crest flared in acknowledgement, smaller than I imagined. Shrook rumbled, voice like rocks reconsidering their place in a landslide. They are, I said, and returned to my notes. The human noticed no one's curiosity. He signed something on the crate with a stylus between his teeth, laughed at a joke only he had told, and vanished into the dormitory wing with the weary efficiency of a person who has learned to move through spaces without asking permission. By afternoon, everyone knew his name. By evening, everyone had a story. The Visteri whispered that his file was sealed at a level usually reserved for Black Ops ghosts. The Trelsians politely circulated a rumor about a planetary relief mission gone wrong, and a ship that did not return. The Aglorians claimed he was lucky, too lucky, which is a kind of cheating, Shrook said, and flexed a claw for emphasis. I did not have a story, so I made one in my head. In it, Kieran Holt was exactly what the statistics said: fragile, likely to shatter, a brittle data point waiting to be plotted toward an inevitable conclusion. Still, he kept showing up to class. He sat in the back for exoecologies, stuck to fingers in his ears during Visteri triad singing, and once slept through an entire lecture on the legal status of salvage rights. Professor Kale, who taught Xenobiology 101, marked his attendance as if he were counting lightning bolts. Professor Kale was a Saurian with old scars and older patients. His scales had bleached to a desaturated turquoise, the color of a planet seeing through radiation fog, and his left eye had a milky glaze that he refused to heal. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The creatures he kept in the lab did it for him, their glass enclosures thrumming with subsonic threats. We will study the Zethrax in week 7, he said on the first day, casually, the way one mentions a storm front, specifically its neuromuscular gating and its predatory feedback loops. It is an excellent example of an apex design, inelegant but effective. Your simulations will include evasion drills. You will not attempt capture. You will not attempt contact. You will not attempt anything other than distance. Someone raised a hand. Professor, has anyone captured one alive? Kel's lip plates pulled back in a smile that showed teeth and experience. Not in a way I would recommend. The Zethrax was Academy famous the way certain mountains are famous. Everyone speaks of it, and most are content to do so from sea level. It haunted the Clinter Wastes, a ferrosilicate desert riddled with magnetic anomalies and old war junk. It was tall as a docked shuttle when it reared up. Its cranial plates were faceted mineral, each facet a lens that bent light into useful lies. It ate everything with a pulse. If you watched slow playback footage of its hunts, the part that took your breath wasn't the speed or the raw power, it was the pause, the weirdly attentive stillness before it moved, as if listening to your future trying to escape. The Academy kept a single desiccated skull in the display hall. I used to stop there on my way to early drills just to measure my fear against its empty eyes. Fear needs exercise. Keep it fit and it will do honest work for you. Week 7 came fast, faster than fear could keep pace. The day's lecture was oversubscribed. Even the cleanup drones lingered near the ceiling like bored moths. Professor Kale had promised a live holo of a Zethrax territory marked just Scent Cloud. No organism man that was thrill enough. He dimmed the lights, adjusted the volume on the hall suppressors to compensate for Aglorian low-end hearing, and flicked his claw. The door blew open. We heard it before we saw it. A clatter of chain, a wet slap, a metallic gasp. The hollow projectors flickered and died, swallowing the habitat sim mid-bloom. The smell rived nexachlorinan sting that made my antennae want to retract into my skull. Visteri harmonics spiked in alarm. The Trelsian gravrigs nudged their owners backward of their own accord, protective as old dogs. Lights, Kale said, but his tone was already a blade. The lights rose. We all rose with them or tried to. My legs folded the wrong way. Shrook's claws hissed open, without permission from the rest of him. Kieran Holt stood in the doorway, breathing like a small fire trying to make up its mind. Over his shoulders slung the way a hunter slings a kill when the ground is too rough. For dragging was a body. It was secured with an improvised harness built from field ropes, a cable from a broken loader, and what looked horribly like his belt. The head lolled. The tail thorned, treacherous dragged a black line across the floor. The Zethrax's skin, if you could call it that, more like a resinized dermal composite, was cracked and blistered in radial blooms. My compound eyes resolved the injuries into a sequence, thermal scarring along the ventral plates, micropercussion dents where something had hammered a confined path to the cranium, a cleaner hole at the back of the skull, where a pulse blade had taken an opinion directly to the brain. Kieran took one step into the hall and nearly stumbled. No one moved to help. Partly fear, partly ritual. If a cadet brought death into class, the tradition said you let them put it down themselves. He did. He shrugged his shoulders forward like a planet shedding a moon and let the Zethrax slide off. It hit the deck with a sound that came from the wrong direction, as if the floor had caught it, but the air had felt the impact. The creature twitched one coil of tail, a reflex that might have just been a muscle remembering its last thought. "Sorry I'm late," Kieran said. His voice was hoarse and amused, amusement being the mask some primates wear to keep their meat from shaking. He wiped at his jacket and left a gray smear that did not wipe away. "Traffic." Professor Kale did not move. He did not smile. He did not say "young man" or "explain yourself." He simply looked. I watched his throat plates rise and fall in a steady, measured pattern. I wondered if he was counting something: scars, options, the number of weeks, until the board demanded he resign. "You," Kale said at last, "have brought a Zethrax into my classroom." Kieran blinked as if surprised by the category error. "No, I brought this Zethrax into your classroom. The other ones are still outside." Shrook made a sound that could, with charitable ears, be called a laugh. The Visteri triad sang a single, pure note of panic, then clamped back down to subsonic murmurs. A Trelsian dropped its stylus. The stylus rang like guilt. "Is it alive?" someone asked from the back. Kieran glanced down. "Not anymore. Did you?" A Visteri voice, razor thin with shock. "Did you capture this alone?" Kieran frowned, genuinely puzzled. "Captured? I killed it. An old law of the Academy. Simplicity is the sharpest spice." The room stung with it. He said it like I breathed, like I woke up, like I tied my shoes, which, for the record, he had not. One lace was torn and tucked into his boot like a bandage. Professor Kale stepped forward finally, the clack of claw on deck measuring the space between sense and accident. He stopped a careful distance away, where even death couldn't be offended by his proximity. "How?" Kale asked, and the word filled the hall with practical hunger. Kieran scratched behind his ear, leaving a smear there, too. "I asked it, mostly." Another laugh, mine, unexpectedly. I clamped my mandibles together. Humor is a reflex around fear. We secrete it like ink. Kieran squinted as if replaying something unpleasant. It came up from below. The sand buckled, and then I was up to my knees in it, already biting. It didn't like the smell of the loader's coolant. I didn't like the smell of the loader's coolant. We agreed on that much. It tried to crack my suit at the waist. I jammed the belt in there so the seal wouldn't give. I got the pulse blade into the soft under the third plate. Angry thing. Smart. It rolled. I went with it. It clipped the loader, and the loader went over and vented steam. It didn't like that either. After that it was just hard work, Kale repeated neutrally, the way a surgeon repeats the word ache. "Yeah." Kieran shrugged, winced at the movement, and hid the wince with a grin so quick it might have been an involuntary diagnostic check. Also, I dropped a crate on its head. Auglorian etiquette demanded respect for the vanquished. Shrook bowed his crest toward the corpse. His eyes, however, never left the human. I could read 12 micro-expressions in that gaze: interest, calculation, the beginnings of a story he would tell later in a tone that gave him the best lines. Kale turned to the class. "Observe," he said, "because the easiest order is also the hardest." We obeyed. It is one thing to review a predatory anatomy in a sterile holo, quite another to be within breath distance of the thing's bone-sweet exhalations and the chemical rumor of its blood. I unrolled my distal antennae to taste the air. It tasted like old batteries and wet iron, and the static that licks the tongue during a thunderstorm. "Note the cranial breach," Kale continued, medical again, almost gentle. "The Zethrax's central node sits here, beneath the third facet. I have told you many times that this is inaccessible without industrial equipment, or a suicidal angle." Kieran raised a hand. "Turns out there's a third option." Kel's eyelid did something I suspected he would regret later, which is being small enough to fit where it can't see you. Later, much later, people would repeat that line with variations, with flourishes, with the kind of retroactive prophecy that heroes collect like barnacles. In the moment it sounded like what it was, a human describing his day. "Medical," Kale said, and the far doors hissed open. A team that had probably been waiting in the hall since the first whiff of Zethrax rolled in with containment stretchers, sprays, and a suite of prayers disguised as tools. They moved around Kieran as if he were another dangerous artifact, which, arguably, he was. "Do not touch the dermal resin with exposed skin," the lead medic snapped, unnecessarily. Every species in the room had a different word for acid, and we knew all of them. "Cadet Holt," Cale said, returning to the human as the corpse was quietly colonized by calm hands. "You are late." Kieran blinked, then smiled in a way that, to my eye, was 3 parts apology and 1 part defiance blended into something drinkable. "I brought a note." He reached into his jacket and produced a scrap of blistered metal, edges curled like a leaf surviving winter. Cale took it with 2 claws and held it up. Stenciled across the plate in faded paint were 3 letters and a number, the Academy's initials, and our cohort tag. It looked like the corner of a loader's sign. It looked like the kind of thing you pick up when you have no pockets everywhere. "But the ones you make." "Cadet Holt," Cale said again, very softly. "Do you know our safety protocols?" "I read them," Kieran said. I disagreed with them. The Visteri choir let out a chord that meant blasphemy in their oldest registers, and curiosity in their newest. The Trelsians whispered about rule trees and exception branches. Shrook's crest shifted, not in anger but in something more dangerous. Interest's sharp older sibling. "What did you disagree with?" I heard myself ask. I had not meant to speak. My voice vibrated my own carapace in a way I found embarrassing. Kieran found me in the crowd. His eyes were a human brown that, through my optics, looked like a slice of planet rich with organics. "The bit where we never try the impossible," he said. "I thought maybe someone should, and you thought that someone should be you." He shrugged again, smaller this time. The gesture of a creature choosing a light load after a heavy one. There wasn't anyone else there. Silence is an art at the Academy. We practice it every time the casualty lists scroll. Every time a simulation ends with the cold hush of an airless bay. We practiced it then. It had new shapes to it. Some of those shapes looked like admiration. Some looked like anger. Some looked like a gap that had not been there before. The kind of gap things fall into or climb out of. Cale folded the blistered scrap of metal and tucked it into a pouch with a reverence. I had not seen him extend to anything but data. "Cadet Holt," he said, returning to formality as if it were a beloved coat. "By the authority vested in me as an instructor of the Galactic Academy, I strongly recommend you report immediately to the Commandant." "Am I expelled?" Kieran asked, too quickly, the kind of too quickly that suggests the answer would be a relief. Kel's teeth showed again, not in humor. "If you were expelled, I would ask you to leave quietly. I am asking you to walk the long corridor." I had walked the long corridor once, after a spar gone wrong. After a junior Auglorian's chest plate had buckled beneath my heel, and his breath had stopped like a door closing. The corridor is lit like an apology. On the walls are names of instructors who never backed down from an urgent truth. Kieran glanced at the Zethrax, at the way the medics had stopped calling it and had started calling it specimen. He scratched at the smear on his cheek and left it there. "Okay," he said. "Do I bring my—" "Leave your trophy," Cale said, the last word a concession to Auglorian sensibilities. "Bring your report." Kieran nodded, felt for pockets he did not have, patted his jacket like an old friend, and turned for the door. He stopped at the threshold and looked back at all of us, Visteri cords and Trelsian sigils, and Auglorian crests and 6 Kthari holding our breath like a shared secret. He raised a hand. It was a human gesture, small and specific. "See you tomorrow," he said, as if tomorrow were an object he could carry too. He left. The door sighed shut. The air remembered him for a while, and then let him go. The medics lifted the Zethrax. Professor Cale stood very still, as if moving would rearrange the facts into a less survivable order. Someone at the back began to clap, not for Kieran, not exactly, but for the possibility that our syllabus had just grown teeth. The clapping faltered, unsure of its target, and died. I found my hands on my tablet. My notes app was open to the page where I had dutifully copied the Academy's first lesson in neat, careful strokes. I highlighted the sentence, "Humans are weak," and then, unsure what I was doing until I had already done it, I added a comma and 3 more words, "Humans are weak," and I could not think how to finish it yet. I saved it anyway. Some sentences deserve their ellipses. We filed out into the corridor, instincts spreading us into species clusters the way oil spreads on water. The buzz of talk was subdued, not with fear now, but with calibration, the hiss and click of minds adjusting dials. Shrook fell into step beside me. His armor was still in the locker, but he wore his mask like a habit. "You saw his hands?" he said softly. "I saw the blood," I said. "Not the blood. The shaking. Only after. Only when it was over." He flexed his own enormous fingers, confiding the movement to the air. "That is when I shake. I thought you never shake." "I am learning," Shrook said. And there was both pride and discomfort in the admission. I considered telling him about the sentence on my tablet. I considered confessing that my mother's bones were still unbroken by any sentence I had written on purpose. Instead, I said, "I have to update my notes." Update them to what? I don't know. I paused, tasted the cobalt tang of the old fear, and found that it had changed flavor, as if mixed with something citric and new. "Maybe we are wrong about one thing. We just don't know which thing yet." Shrook's crest lifted and settled, the Aglorian equivalent of a shrug. "I still think he is too lucky. Luck can be a skill," I said. "Then perhaps we should study it," he replied gravely, and turned toward the training pits as if the secret to human luck could be seized. With a harder workout, behind us, maintenance drones skittered out to clean the Zethrax's smear. They worked with brisk, affectionless competence, little arms armed with solvents and tiny prayers of their own. The Carter's air recycler sighed, and the last of the beast scent was folded into the station's endless respiration. That night I could not sleep. The stars outside the dormitory viewport had the restless shimmer of a ship adjusting its vector. I stood with my forehead against the glass until my temperature threatened to fog it, and thought about how many different kinds of fragility there are. There is the kind that breaks, there is the kind that bends, and there is the kind that learns exactly where to put the blade. Somewhere down the silent spine of the station, a human walked the long corridor. Somewhere deeper, a commandant weighed the difference between rules and reasons. And in the lab, under lights calibrated to mimic a moon that never rose over the Clinter wastes, a dead apex predator cooled on a table while a professor who liked data stared at a story he had not scheduled. In the morning, the academy would decide what to do with Kieran Holt: reprimand, expulsion, promotion, experiment. The academy is good at decisions. It has made catastrophically many. It has learned to wear them well. I closed my eyes and drafted 3 possible futures. In one, I watched a human pack his single bag, fold his fragile shirts, and leave the orbiting city by the same unnoticed corridors he had entered, a rumor already hardening into cautionary tale. In another, I stood beside him in the training pits and learned a clumsy, brilliant new kind of footwork. In the third, ships burned. All 3 felt plausible. Only one tasted like the air had tasted when Kieran said tomorrow and made it sound portable. I reopened my tablet. The sentence still waited. Humans are weak. And I added therefore and stopped a moment to feel the shape of the word, its engineer's logic, its quiet trapdoor into surprise. Humans are weak, and therefore I closed the tablet. Some things are better finished in motion. I slept, eventually, in the way cadets do, hard, late, preemptively. When the station's morning chimes sang their patient, planetary chord, I woke to a rumor that didn't feel like a rumor at all. Kieran Holt had not been expelled. He had been assigned a badge I had only ever seen on the chests of final years and veterans, who carried the gravity of other systems in their posture. A provisional field specialist designation. The Academy's way of saying we have no idea what this is, but we will pretend we do until we learn. On my way to class, I paused at the Zethrax skull in the display hall. The glass had been cleaned. The plaque still read Apex Predator, Clinter Wastes. I watched my reflection slip across the fossil's facets and thought about how light can be tricked into thinking stone is water. Humans are weak, I whispered to the skull, because I am superstitious and because superstition loves a call and response. The skull said nothing. It did, however, reflect me in a new angle. That was enough. I walked on, already late. Professor Kale disliked tardiness. So did I. It wastes time you might need later. Kieran had shown us that time could be picked up and carried if you gripped it right. We were going to learn how to grip it, or it was going to grip us. Either way, there would be fewer ellipses in my notes by week's end. For the first time since orientation, I did not believe the sentence on the tablet was a law. I believed it was a door. The day after Kieran Holt dragged a dead Zethrax into Professor Kell's xenobiology lecture, the Academy felt different. Not visibly. The same plasma torches hissed along the hangar walls. The same mag lifts groaned under cargo pallets. The same smell of ionized coolant clung to the air ducts. But underneath, something fundamental had shifted. It was in the way the Visteri choir clusters quieted when he walked past, their harmonics turning from contemptuous dissonance to cautious inquiry. It was in the way the Aglorians paused during combat drills to glance toward the human observation deck, sizing up a creature they'd once dismissed as prey. Even the stoic Trelsians, who prided themselves on pure rationality, allocated significant processing bandwidth to the human variable. In their collective simulation models, the Academy was a place of equations. Everything could be measured, categorized, and predicted. But Kieran Holt had just proven that the human part of the equation was a wild card. And wild cards scared everyone. The commandant's verdict when Kieran reappeared the next morning. No one was sure what to expect. Rumors had flown through the Academy's 13 orbital rings all night. Some said he'd been arrested and confined to the brig for violating containment protocols. Others claimed the Council had summoned him to Earth immediately, afraid of what his recklessness might ignite. The most dramatic whispers said he'd been disintegrated for violating Clause 7.2 of the Interstellar Safety Charter, unauthorized introduction of apex life forms into controlled environments. But there he was, same copper hair, same scuffed field jacket, same faintly irreverent smile. If anything had changed, it was in his eyes. They were calmer, deeper, like a soldier who had been told something heavy and had decided to carry it anyway. Shrook, the Aglorian in our cohort, was the first to approach him. They didn't execute you, he rumbled. Genuinely surprised, not for lack of trying, Kieran replied dryly, tossing a ration bar into his mouth. They did give me a promotion, though. He tapped the new badge pinned to his jacket, Field Specialist Provisional, an honor normally reserved for elite fourth years, or those with confirmed combat field experience. The implication was clear. The Academy now considered Kieran's encounter with the Zethrax to qualify as both. You killed the most feared predator in the quadrant, Shrook said. And they reward you? Kieran smirked. I think they're trying to figure out whether to make me a hero or a warning. Until they decide, I'm apparently both. It wasn't just bravado. For all the talk of rules and regulations, the Academy respected results, and Kieran's results were undeniable. The dead Zethrax had been dissected overnight, and the data extracted from its corpse already filled 20 terabytes of the xenobiology department's archives. No species in living memory had ever acquired such a pristine specimen. Humans, muttered a Visteri, her voice pulsing with both awe and disgust. Always breaking things to see how they work. Kieran heard it, and to everyone's shock, he nodded. Yeah, that's pretty much our thing. The test 3 days later, the instructors decided to put the human anomaly to the test. It started with a simple announcement. Field Evaluation Simulation, Class 3007A, 0700 hours. All cadets report to Training Dome Sigma. The training domes were where cadets earned or lost reputations. They were enormous holographically adaptive arenas capable of replicating any environment, from the methane seas of Arcan 9 to the fractured gravity wells of the Fran Expanse. Most simulations were grueling but manageable. This one was different. This one had been labeled a level hazard, a classification typically reserved for final examinations or live combat prep. And at the bottom of the briefing, one sentence stood out. Target, Zethrax. Containment protocol, none. Objective, survive. The implication was clear. The Academy wanted to know whether Kieran's kill had been a fluke, or a glimpse of something far more dangerous. When we entered the dome, the floor rippled beneath our feet, rearranging itself into a jagged stretch of clitter desert. Blood-red dunes shifted under harsh violet skies. Twisted wreckage from centuries-old war machines lay half-buried like the bones of forgotten titans. In the distance, a low, guttural roar shook the sand. This is insane, hissed Lara, a Visteri tactician, her 6 eyes darting nervously. "We're trainees, not soldiers. Speak for yourself," Shrook growled, flexing his talons. "I have waited for a chance to test myself against the beast. You fought one before." Kieran asked casually. "No," Shrook admitted. "But I imagined it." Kieran grinned. "Yeah, that's not the same." The simulation started with a thunderclap. The Zethrax emerged from the shifting dunes, 12 feet of chitin and muscle, its crystal-lensed eyes sweeping the landscape. It was bigger than the one Kieran had brought down, older, meaner. Its movements had the eerie precision of something that enjoyed killing. "Formation Gamma," shouted Lara, and the cadets scattered into coordinated units. The Trelsians established a sensor grid. The Visteri choir began emitting disorientation frequencies. The Aglorians formed a shock line. And Kieran? He walked straight toward the creature. "What the void is he doing?" Lara shrieked. "Something stupid," Shrook answered grimly, though he didn't look away. The hunter's lessened Zethrax roared, the sound so deep it vibrated the sand beneath our boots. It lunged, a blur of jagged limbs and gnashing fangs, but Kieran didn't retreat. He closed the distance. The tactic made no sense. Everyone knew the Zethrax was most dangerous up close. Its peripheral armor was near impenetrable. Its claws could shear through exosuits like paper. Every simulation taught you the same lesson: stay mobile, stay distant, stay alive. But Kieran wasn't playing by the simulation's rules. He was playing by the beast's. He ducked beneath a sweeping claw, sliding between the creature's legs and slashing upward with his plasma blade. Sparks exploded from the joint plating. The Zethrax roared again, pivoting with inhuman speed, but Kieran was already gone, rolling behind a slab of wreckage. "Why isn't it focusing on us?" one of the Trelsians asked, confused. "It's locked on him," Lara said. "He's taunting it." And that's exactly what he was doing. Every move, every feint, every reckless lunge was designed not to kill, but to provoke. He was forcing the Zethrax into predictable attack patterns, burning through its energy reserves, exploiting its predatory instincts against itself. "Humans don't win by overpowering," Shrook murmured, realization dawning. "They win by irritating." Kieran ducked another strike, planting an explosive charge beneath a cluster of exposed nerves on the creature's forelimb. It detonated with a searing flash. The beast stumbled, only slightly, but it was enough. "Now!" Kieran shouted. We didn't hesitate. Plasma fire rained down from the Trelsian grid. Visteri harmonic blasts disoriented its vision. Aglorian shock troops slammed into its flanks. For the first time, the Zethrax faltered. And then, impossibly, it fell. The debriefed simulation ended in stunned silence. The desert dissolved into a sterile silver floor. The dead Zethrax faded into code and data streams. All that remained was the echo of what we'd just witnessed. Professor Kale stepped forward from the observation deck, his reptilian features unreadable. "Class 3007A, he said slowly, "your performance was acceptable." But one cadet's performance was exceptional. Kieran shifted awkwardly as every eye in the room turned toward him. "Explain your approach," Kale said. Kieran scratched the back of his neck. "I stopped thinking of it as a monster and started thinking of it as a problem. Problems have patterns. You find the pattern, you break it. You deliberately attracted its focus," Kale noted. "Why? Because predators don't split attention well," Kieran said simply. "If I could become the bigger threat, it would ignore the rest of you. That gave us a shot." Kale was silent for a long moment, his gaze drilling into the human like a scalpel. "And if you had failed?" Kieran shrugged. "Then I'd be dead. But so would half of you. And that's not acceptable." For once, no one laughed at the human's audacity. No one called it suicidal or reckless. Because beneath the bravado, there was something else, something terrifying and undeniable. Strategy. The Academy had taught us to fear the Zethrax. Kieran Holt had taught us how to beat it, redefining Fragilitith at night. The dormitories buzzed with conversations, not about the simulation itself, but about what it meant. "Humans are insane," muttered Lara, though there was grudging respect in her voice. "They walk into death and call it a strategy." "Not insane," corrected Shrook. "Adaptable. They turn their weakness into a weapon." I said nothing. I was too busy replaying the moment when the Zethrax, the unstoppable nightmare of the Clinter wastes, had flinched, not from firepower, not from numbers, but from one human who refused to play by the rules. We'd always been taught that humans were fragile. Now I understood the truth. Fragility was their camouflage. They knew they were weaker. They knew they broke easier. And so they became the species that never stopped learning, never stopped improvising, never stopped fighting, not because they could afford to lose, but because they couldn't. And in that relentless, stubborn refusal to accept defeat, they had become something the galaxy had no metric for. The next morning, I walked past the display hall where the preserved Zethrak's skull had once filled me with fear. Now it seemed smaller, not because the beast had changed, but because we had seen what a human could do when faced with the impossible. And for the first time in the Academy's long history, the galaxy began to wonder if this is what one fragile human can achieve. What happens when billions of them decide they're not fragile at all? The first official report about Kieran Holt circulated through the Galactic Academy 2 weeks after the Zethrak's incident. It was only 8 pages long, but in a place where words were weighed like uranium, 8 pages was a tidal wave. The title was sterile, almost comically so. Preliminary Assessment, Homo sapiens Cadet Holt, K. Behavioral and Tactical Anomalies. The opening sentence was less sterile. Subject exhibits repeated deviation from expected human behavioral parameters. What followed was part science, part speculation, and part confession. The report noted Kieran's unorthodox risk calculus, his propensity for leveraging environmental hazards as offensive vectors, and his abnormally rapid situational adaptation. It cataloged the 2 major incidents so far, the killing of a live Zethrax and the A-level simulation victory, and concluded with a recommendation for continued observation under controlled, but increasingly high-risk conditions. We all knew what that meant. They were testing him. 1. A shift in gravity. It started subtly. During tactical theory, instructors began throwing him more complex variables. During combat training, they paired him with opponents who had decades of battlefield experience. During diplomatic exercises, the ones most humans failed spectacularly, they placed him as team leader and recorded every word, and every time, he adapted. I saw it myself during a 3-day survival trial on Helix 4, a wine-scoured rock, known for storms that could peel hull plating from a shuttle. We were dropped with minimal supplies and told to secure an extraction beacon. By day 2, most teams had fractured. Vesteri groups devolved into endless harmonic debates. Auglorian squads spent half their time fighting each other, and the Trelsians simply calculated that success probability had dropped below 14% and powered down to conserve energy. Kieran built a shelter from debris, scavenged thermal capacitors from a wrecked survey probe, and lit a fire, something so primitive, so human, that no one had even considered it. By nightfall, every surviving cadet was huddled around that fire. Even Shrook, who had once called humans soft animals that walk upright. "Tell me, human," Shrook grumbled, his heavy brow casting jagged shadows in the orange glow. "Do you enjoy proving us wrong?" Kieran poked the fire with a twisted length of alloy. "I don't think about it like that." "Then how do you think about it?" I asked. He shrugged. "I just hate losing." There was no arrogance in his tone, no bravado. It was a simple truth, stated with the same ease as saying water was wet. But that truth terrified me more than any beast in the galaxy, because we feared death, but he feared failure, and that made him unstoppable. 2. The debate be midterm. Kieran Holt wasn't just a cadet anymore. He was a question. It wasn't just the other students talking about him now. It was the instructors, the administrators, the council observers, the galaxy's old assumptions. The neat little boxes into which humanity had been tucked were cracking. The first official debate happened during a faculty assembly. It wasn't supposed to be public, but leaks from the Academy were as inevitable as solar flares. "I propose we reevaluate the human doctrine," said Admiral Kethrix, a towering Auglorian with scars older than most planets. "Our classification is outdated. They are not fragile. They are not insignificant. They are something else, something dangerous." Hissed Vesteri Ambassador Relka. "Their history is a graveyard of their own making." They destroy, consume, expand, and now they adapt faster than any known species. Do you wish to hand them the keys to interstellar conflict? They've already earned them. Kethrix countered. If one human cadet can outthink, outfight, and outlast every metric we have, imagine what an entire fleet could do. That's exactly what I fear, Relka snapped. The room fell silent, and for the first time in centuries, the galaxy's most powerful minds admitted the truth. They didn't know whether humanity was a blessing or a threat. 3. Conversations in the Darkiran knew none of this, or maybe he did, and just didn't care. One night, near the end of the term, I found him on the observation deck, a circular chamber of transparent alloy that looked out over the spiral arms of the Sargassian expanse. He was sitting cross-legged, boots off, jacket draped beside him, staring at the stars. Trying to memorize them, I asked, settling beside him. He chuckled. Just trying to decide which ones I want to visit first. I hesitated. You know they're talking about you, right? The council, the faculty, everyone. Let them, he said. Talking's free. They don't know what to make of you. None of us do. He was quiet for a long time. Then, back home, we used to have this saying, if you can't solve the problem, make yourself part of the equation. And that means, it means if the universe expects you to fail, then you change the definition of failure. I frowned. That's not how most species think. Yeah, he said, smiling faintly. I noticed. We sat in silence for a while, watching a binary star system slowly eclipse itself on the horizon. When he finally spoke again, his voice was softer, not the voice of the reckless cadet who had dragged his Zethrax into a classroom, but of something deeper, older. My great-grandfather used to tell me stories about Earth, he said, about the first people who climbed mountains, or crossed oceans, or flew into space. They didn't do it because they were strong. They did it because they were terrified of not trying. And did they succeed? Not always. Some froze to death on those mountains. Some drowned. Some burned up on re-entry. But they kept trying anyway, and eventually they got it right. He looked at me then, and for the first time I saw something behind those human eyes that I couldn't categorize. Not courage, not ambition, but a kind of defiance written into his very bones. That's who we are, he said. We fail until we don't. 4. The new curriculum a month later. The academy quietly revised its curriculum. It wasn't announced, but we noticed. Survival drills grew harder. Tactical simulations became more unpredictable. Psychological assessments now included adaptive decision-making metrics. The official explanation was routine program improvement. We all knew the truth. They were training us to think like humans. And the most unsettling part, it was working. I watched Visteri choir teams abandon centuries of rigid tactical harmony in favor of chaotic, improvisational strategies. I saw Aglorian shock units begin experimenting with lighter, more mobile combat forms. Even the Trelsians, who once refused to operate without a 99.7% success probability, started running missions with only 65% certainty. For experiential learning, the galaxy wasn't just observing Kieran Holt anymore. It was adapting to him. 5. A whisper of fear, but not everyone welcomed this change. Some species, the old powers, the ones whose empires had been unchallenged for millennia, saw the shift not as evolution, but as a warning. They're rewriting the rules, hissed Ambassador Relka during a closed council session. Today they're slaying beasts and rewriting tactics. Tomorrow they'll be rewriting us. And if they do, Admiral Kethrix asked, perhaps we deserve to be rewritten. Do you understand what happens when a species like that gains momentum? Relka shot back. They don't stop. They don't pause. They don't negotiate. They consume every frontier they touch. And when they run out of frontiers, she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a hiss. They make new ones. Silence fell over the chamber. It was the first time in recorded history that the council admitted, even to itself, that humanity might one day be not just an ally or a rival, but a dominant force. 6. The edge of the map be the end of the term. There was a saying whispered through the academy's corridors, sometimes as a joke, sometimes as a prayer: beware the fragile ones. They build empires out of failure, and every time I heard it, I thought of Kieran Holt, the cadet who killed the beast. the strategist who taunted death in a simulation, the boy who looked at the stars and saw destinations instead of limits. He had arrived at the academy as a footnote, a curiosity, a token of diplomatic goodwill. Now he was something far greater, a harbinger. The galaxy had always known that humans were fragile, but fragility, we were learning, was not the opposite of strength. It was its foundation. And somewhere, in the endless dark between the stars, I felt the universe itself begin to shift, as if it too had realized the truth. The most dangerous species in existence was not the one that crushed its enemies with overwhelming power. It was the one that refused to stay broken. The first warning didn't sound like one. It came as a minor data anomaly, a deep space relay reporting interference along the outer rim. At first, the Academy's analysts dismissed it as background radiation from a pulsar cluster, or another glitch in the sensor array. But as the hours passed, more anomalies appeared. One relay failed, then 3. Then an entire sector of the net went dark. When the comms blackout reached the Vega Gate, a heavily fortified wormhole that no pirate or raider would dare approach, the message was no longer subtle. Something was coming, and by the time the Council admitted it, the Cthulhu swarm was already inside our borders. A galaxy unprepared. Cthulhu had always been a myth, a species so ancient and predatory that even the Visteri archives, which stretched back 500,000 years, spoke of them only in fragments. They consumed stars. They hollowed out planets. They left behind systems stripped bare and silent, as if life had never existed there at all. The last recorded contact with them was 27,000 cycles ago, in a war so catastrophic that 3 civilizations erased the records to avoid remembering. And now, they were back. The first worlds to fall were remote outposts, scientific stations, mining colonies, trade satellites. They vanished without distress calls, without debris, without survivors. Then came the larger settlements. Cities burned, refugees fled. Entire fleets were annihilated in battles that lasted less than an hour. The Council convened an emergency summit. They debated, they blamed, they panicked, and in the end, they did what bureaucracies always do when faced with the unthinkable. They called the Academy. Drafted were still cadets. Technically, most of us had yet to complete a full tour, but the swarm didn't care about training schedules, and the galaxy didn't have the luxury of waiting. Within 72 hours, the Academy was transformed from a school into a war headquarters. Combat instructors were reassigned as fleet strategists. Simulation domes became tactical planning centers. Even the mess halls were converted into triage stations. And us? We were drafted into the Vanguard Initiative, a desperate coalition of the Academy's best and brightest, tasked with doing what seasoned admirals and battle-hardened generals had failed to do: slow the swarm down. It was suicide. Everyone knew it, but no one said it aloud. On the day we shipped out, the launch bays were filled with cadets trying, and failing, to look fearless. Visteri choirs hummed battle harmonics that shook the deck plates. Auglorian warriors painted old war glyphs onto their armor. Tralsian units compiled thousands of tactical permutations, each more pessimistic than the last. And then there was Kieran. While the rest of us were weighed down by the enormity of what was coming, he looked almost serene, like someone about to do something inevitable. Shrook clapped him on the shoulder. "We will die well, human. Let's try living well first," Kieran replied. 3. The first battle of Cthulhu hit us at the Ardent Line, a thin strip of space defending 12 inhabited worlds. The Vanguard fleet numbered just over 300 ships. The swarm's armada blotted out the stars. Their vessels weren't ships in the conventional sense. They were living constructs, vast, chitinous leviathans that swam through vacuum as if it were an ocean. They moved with horrifying coordination, a single mind directing 1,000 bodies. Our fleet lasted 18 minutes. The command carrier Iridian was the first to fall, torn apart by spine tendrils that erupted from the void. Plasma barrages that could vaporize moons barely scorched their organic hulls. Boarding teams that managed to breach the Cthulhu vessels were never heard from again. And then, just when retreat became the only option, Kieran made a decision that changed everything. He ordered his strike team to advance. 4. The human tacticit was madness. The fleet was in full withdrawal. But Kieran and his squadron of lightly armed skirmish craft dove into the heart of the enemy. Formation. At first, we thought they'd been hit. Then we realized it was deliberate. "What is he doing?" Lara hissed from the sensor pit. "Being human," I whispered. They weaved between the swarm ships, too small and fast to track accurately. Instead of trying to destroy them, an impossible task, they provoked them. Hit-and-run attacks, false transponder codes, simulated warp signatures. They turned chaos into a weapon. The swarm broke formation. It was subtle at first. A single predator peeling off to chase them, but the disruption spread like a fracture. Entire clusters diverted to intercept Kieran's squadron. Their perfect coordination, their unstoppable momentum, began to fray. Open fire. Admiral Ketherix barked. The vanguard seized the opportunity. Concentrated salvos tore into exposed Cthulhu flanks. Auglorian boarding pods detonated inside weakened hulls. Vesteri resonance cannons split the void with harmonic fury. The battle wasn't won, far from it, but for the first time, the swarm bled. And the galaxy noticed. 5. The Commander Kieran's squadron returned to the Iridian's replacement flagship, battered but alive. He limped down the hangar ramp, uniform scorched, eyes sharp. The Council's envoy was waiting for him. "Cadet Holt," the envoy said, voice trembling. "You disobeyed 3 direct orders, violated tactical doctrine, and nearly got your entire team killed." "Yes, sir," Kieran said evenly. The envoy hesitated. "And you saved 38 million lives. Effective immediately. You are promoted to Commander of Vanguard Operations." Shrook laughed so hard his crest hit the bulkhead. "A commander, barely out of your shell, and they give you a fleet." "I don't want a fleet," Kieran muttered. "Then why do it?" I asked. He looked at me, and his answer was simple. "Because someone has to." 6. The spark word of Kieran's command spread faster than any ship. Across the galaxy, species that had once mocked humanity as fragile now dissected every tactic he used. His swarm-breaking maneuver became required study at every military academy. His chaos doctrine, leveraging unpredictability as a force multiplier, rewrote centuries of battle theory. But the most significant change wasn't in tactics. It was in perception. On 100 worlds, old prejudices cracked. Vesteri choir nodes that once dismissed humans as impulsive now studied their neural adaptability. Auglorian clans began inviting human advisors to their war councils. Even the insular Trelsian collective acknowledged that organic irrationality was a strategic asset. And the swarm, for the first time in their history, they hesitated. 7. The final transmission months later. After a dozen brutal campaigns, Kieran led a coalition task force deep into Cthulhu space. It was supposed to be a reconnaissance mission. It turned into something far more dangerous. The last transmission we received from his flagship was heavily distorted. But I'll never forget it. "This is Commander Holt. We found their core nest. It's worse than we thought, but there's a weakness. It's small, stupidly small. But if we hit it hard enough, it might just static, silence it for weeks." We heard nothing. Many assumed he was dead. Some whispered that he'd been captured. Others believed he had gone rogue. Then, one morning, the sky over the Cthulhu stronghold burned. A cascade detonation rippled through their hive fleet. Entire nodes collapsed in on themselves. Their seemingly endless coordination disintegrated. The swarm, the nightmare, that had haunted the galaxy for millennia, began to retreat. And leading the charge, back through their collapsing lines, was a single battered flagship. Kieran Holt was alive. 8. Legacy. War didn't end overnight. It took 5 more years, countless battles, and unimaginable sacrifice. But when the last Cthulhu vessel burned in the void, the galaxy was not the same. For the first time in history, humanity was no longer the fragile species. They were tacticians, commanders, innovators, and, perhaps most importantly, hope. At the Academy, they built a monument to the vanguard. At its center stood a statue of Kieran Holt, not in armor, not wielding a weapon, but simply standing with his hands clasped behind his back, looking toward the stars. Beneath it was an inscription, carved in the languages of every known civilization. They said humans were fragile. Then he walked into class carrying the beast that hunted them. and the galaxy was never the same again. Epilogue. The new equationy sometimes returned to that monument. I touch the words carved into the stone and remember the boy who once sat cross-legged on the observation deck, dreaming of the stars. He never conquered them. He never tried to. He simply refused to accept their limits. And that is the paradox of humanity. The thing none of our metrics ever accounted for. They are fragile, yes. They break. They bleed. They die easily, but they also endure. They learn. They rise. They adapt. And in doing so, they change the universe around them. The galaxy once believed that fragility was a flaw. Now we understand. Fragility is their greatest strength, because when the universe breaks them, they build something stronger from the pieces, and when the universe tells them you can't, they smile and answer,